How does a stage manager keep all of the different elements of the show straight in their head during rehearsals? And how do they know what to bring up in production meetings? The secret is we don't. One of the first things we do during prep week is a production analysis, and today I'm going to give you all of the tips and tricks you need to make sure yours is a smashing success. My name is Kent, and this is your half-hour call. Attention cast and crew, this is your half-hour call. Half hour to the top of the show. Half hour, please. Alrighty friends, we are back with another episode of the Almost Complete Guide to Stage Management. If you are seeing my face for the first time, welcome, I'm so glad you're here. I am Kent, an equity stage manager and performer based out of the Central Florida area, and you are watching Half Hour Call, which is focused on shining the spotlight on technical theater. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most important Excel spreadsheets you will make during the entire run of a show, and that is the production analysis. Now, typically, a production analysis isn't really distributed to anyone and you're just kind of using it for your own reference, but it's still super crucial, and if you do this right, it'll make several other pieces of paperwork a lot easier later on in your process. But what does a stage manager's production analysis contain? Well, basically, as you're reading the script for the second or third or fourth time, you'll be notating every time that there's a technical element called for in the script. Whether that's lights, sound, costumes, props, whatever, it's going to be written down into a spreadsheet so you can keep track of every element of the show. But why is this process and document important? Well, stage managers are typically brought in a lot later on in the process than designers or directors, so design meetings and production meetings might have been happening well before you're even in the room. Just the simple act of creating a production analysis like I'm going to show you today not only will help you learn the show really well, but it'll also help you keep track of things in production meetings and assist you in conversations with designers. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll give you my top do's and do nots for your production analyses. Analyses? For your production analysis. This process is super important and is a key factor in whether or not you'll be able to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And getting people on the same page early is super important. I was an ASM on this period comedy piece where a lot of the humor came from people entering and exiting rooms and slamming doors. Everything was going really well until about halfway through the run. Every night, one of the actors would exit, slamming the door behind him, and hand me a prop that he no longer needed. Well, one night, instead of handing me the prop, he hands me the entire doorknob. As it turned out, the doorknobs were just pieces of plastic that were stapled onto the door. So it's no wonder that it fell off halfway through the run. The production stage manager and I were really lucky that our miscommunication was only on something as inconsequential as a doorknob and not something that could seriously injure someone. So in larger production shows with more spectacle like Beetlejuice or Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, it's super important that you get this document done correctly so that everyone is on the same page as soon as possible. Alright, that's enough talking about it, let's get to work. I'll be doing my example from the first 5 scenes of Dear Evan Hansen, and if you want to play along at home, go ahead and do a production analysis for the Royal Variety performance of The Play That Goes Wrong, the script for which will be in the comments down below. Alright, so here we are in Microsoft Excel. I prefer to do this in Excel rather than Word because it lets me do a few really cool tricks that I'll show you a little bit later, and also because I'm pretty much the only person that's going to be reading this. No one else is it's not going to be distributed to anyone else. It's going to be really simple to make. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is set up our columns. The first 3 are going to be act, scene, and page number. And we can go ahead and make those a little bit smaller. The next column for me is going to be called characters, so that way I can put whatever character name is involved in that particular element of the show. If any, it might be blank. So the next few columns are going to be the different departments whose elements we might be including in this document. For the sake of this template, I'm going to include a bunch of different elements that you very well might not have in your show, and certainly won't have in the Play That Goes Wrong example. However, this is one of those times where it's really important to think about what your show needs, and frankly, who your theater has on staff. So our departments today will be lights, projections, sound, scenic, props, costumes, effects, which could be automation or pyrotechnics or really anything that's not included in these. And then I also like to include columns for fight choreography and intimacy choreography. Any instance of heightened physicality, whether it's violent or affectionate, should really be something you discuss with the director so that you and the director can figure out how it's going to be approached in the rehearsal room. Is there going to be a fight choreographer? Is there going to be an intimacy director? Does the director plan to do this by themselves? all of those things are going to come into play. So I like to include it on the production analysis. And now, as per usual, my method is about to deviate from the norm. What a lot of people will like to do is they like to make these individual columns large enough to include the individual elements. So if it's like lights up or thunder or whatever, I don't do this. I make them nice and small, just small enough for there to be an X that indicates whether that department is involved with that element of the show. This helps us do a really cool trick that I'm going to show you in a second. The next two columns are element and notes. Element is where you put whatever the thing is that you're talking about, and then notes is usually where I put anything involved in the script or any questions that I have about it. So now that we've established all of our columns, I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting with shading and lines to make everything a little bit easier to follow. Now there's one more very important column that we need to add. I put as the last column a question mark. This is where I mark off with an X any element that I have a question about that I want to bring up to the director or the designer or the production manager or really anyone. So now that we've built our template, let's take a look at one that I've already filled out for the first 5 scenes of Dear Evan Hansen. So here we are in an example of a partially completed Dear Evan Hansen production analysis. One thing to note is that there are a few elements that are highlighted in yellow. That's just so I remember to talk to you about them and I'm able to draw attention to them. It's not actually a formatting choice that I would make for this document. So one of the quick tips that I wanted to show you is to go into View, click Freeze Panes, and then select Freeze Top Row. It's good to do this before you start filling everything in, but this allows this top row here to stay put. There we go. To stay put when you scroll. So no matter how far down you scroll, you always have those headings to remind you of what is what. So let's talk about the content of this document a little bit. This first element that I have highlighted here in yellow, the laptop, is an excellent example of what's really common, and that's that a single element or a single item or a single effect is going to be the domain of multiple departments. The easiest and most common example of this is probably a lightning strike. So there's going to be a flash of light, most likely, and that's handled by electrics, and then there's going to be a sound effect of some sort, and that would be handled by sound. In this case, Evan opens up a laptop and the stage directions call for a gauzy white glow of the screen. So in this instance, it would be considered almost like a practical light, and it would be the domain of both electrics and props. One thing to keep in mind is to really stick to the language of the script in terms of any descriptions or artistic decisions. To illustrate that, I've highlighted these two different elements. So Evan is using his cell phone in scene 2. This is the first time this prop has shown up. But in scene 1, despite the fact that the prop is not physically in the scene, Jared, another character in the show, calls Evan's phone a weird off-brand cell phone. So I've included that in my notes so that while I'm talking to the props department, I remember that that's something that is said in the script in the show. By contrast, the next line down is for Heidi's nurse's scrubs, and it would be crossing a line since it doesn't say anything about it in the script other than that she's wearing nurse's scrubs. If I described them in any way, like floral print or blue or whatever, I would no longer be analyzing the script and I would be making choices. And that's not the goal. So this last highlighted element involves a little bit of knowledge of the show as a whole, so I don't know that I would have caught it this early if I was just reading the script for the first or second time. But one thing that I clocked during this reading of the script is that Larry and Cynthia's relationship is really complex and layered, and because of that complexity, it would be a good conversation to have with the director to see if an intimacy director needs to be brought on for this. While we're in this program, I have one more really helpful tip to share with you. While you're having a conversation with the director or certain designers, you may want to focus on one department at a time. The easiest way to do this is to highlight all of those category columns, go to Sort and Filter, and click Filter. There will be little arrows that come down on each of the headings, and as you scroll, they still exist and they follow your header. And then when you want to focus on one department or one category, let's say I'm talking to the director and I want to address all of my questions that I have as I'm going through the script, I'm going to click on the little arrow next to the question mark and then unselect blank and click OK. Now it is filtering out for me everything that does not have an X in this column, which means everything that I did not have a question about. So in this instance, I had a question about the school items, I had a question about the kitchen table, I had a question about all these consumables, and obviously I had my question about the intimate traumatic moment with Larry and Cynthia. This can be super helpful and save you a lot of time. Like, let's say you're meeting with the lighting designer and you just want to deal with things that are dealing directly with lighting. You can use the filter on the Excel spreadsheet, and now suddenly the only things you're focusing on are the things that have lighting involved. If you want to play around with this Excel spreadsheet, there's a link in the description below for you to play around with it. And keep in mind that there are different sheets on the same document. It's just one document. There is a sheet that is blank, which is just the template, and then a sheet that is complete, which is my filled out version. All right, now that we've taken a pass at making a production analysis, it is time for me to share with you my top do's and do nots for production analyses. Number 1, do not just skim the stage directions. There will be a lot of details and things that they talk about in the actual dialogue that you'll need to know about for this production analysis. The flip side to that is do look for implied props and costumes in the dialogue. If person A says,
"Brr, I'm cold,"
and person B says,
"I have a jacket,"
and person A says,
"Thank you, I'm warm now,"
we can pretty safely assume that person B gave person A their jacket, which means that we're going to need a jacket that's removable. Number 2, do not stress about making this document pretty. Odds are the only people that are actually going to have this document are you and your fellow stage managers on your team. You may end up showing the director or a designer what you've written, but pretty much it's just going to live on your computer. I've never personally distributed this document to anyone other than my own team. And so do focus on the content. Anytime that you would have put towards creating a really fancy format, other than those tips and tricks that I just showed you, spend that time going through the script with a fine-toothed comb and finding those elements that might be a problem for communication later. And number 3, do not attempt to make artistic choices or decisions in this production analysis. Essentially, anything that is not in the script itself doesn't need to be included in this document. However, do include every department that might even remotely be involved in this element. If you don't already know exactly how an element is being handled, like the laptop that needs to emit a glow, I would go ahead and flag every single department that you think may have a chance at being involved in this, just in case there's an element of that thing that falls to them. And if you follow all of these tips and really take your time and go through the script properly, you will be set up for amazing success in not only production meetings, but as you go through rehearsal, and you'll have learned a whole lot about the script and the show itself in the process. If you're watching this video and thinking, oh my goodness, he missed this super important category or department that I always include on my production analysis, please leave it for me in the comments down below. I want to know what you use and what you find helpful in these production analyses. And as always, if you got some value out of this video, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button, and go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any more stage management tips. I do not have a Patreon, and I do not plan on making a Patreon. If this fact bums you out, please hit that like button and then take the money you would have given me and give it to one of these awesome organizations instead. The Actors Fund, Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, or my personal favorite option, go see a show at a local equity regional theater and go see some live theater, because it's the absolute best way to learn. Thank you so much for watching, liking, and subscribing. My name is Kent, and this has been your half-hour call. Do you have a question or an idea for a video? If you do, send me an email at askhalfhourcall@gmail.com. That's askhalfhourcall@gmail.com.